So UFC 299 just got a lot more exciting with the addition of an excellent lightweight bout. This is going to be Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint Denis. Now, at first blush, there doesn't seem to be much upside for Poirier here. You know, he's holding on to that number 3 spot in the division. Benoit is sitting at number 12, but I don't think there's very many people, certainly not 11 other people at 155 that are truly better than BSD. He's on a 5-fight finish streak. He has been wreaking havoc in the division. That last KO finish of Matt Steamroller Frevola was an incredible one and very violent at that. The question is, there's a big difference between Matt Frevola and Dustin Poirier, and sometimes we get a little bit of ahead of ourselves, like we did with Rafael Fiziev, thinking that he was going to walk through Justin Gaethje, and Justin showed him exactly what the top 5 of lightweight looks and feels like. Do you see this kind of being a similar situation, like a welcome to the top 5, or do you think that Benoit Saint Denis has got Dustin Poirier's number?
Well, there's a lot on this fight. I really love the fact that Poirier is extending a hand out to somebody that's not even in the top 10, but they're just barely in the top 15. BSD deserves it. 5-fight win streak. He's like the French version of Tim Kennedy. Yep. He is an absolute monster. Fighting in the UFC is like an off day compared to what he does in his day-to-day lifestyle. If you don't know who he is, this is absolutely going to be his coming out party, but it's really difficult to get your hand raised when you're fighting Dustin Poirier. Yep. And while Benoit Saint Denis is really good everywhere, Dustin Poirier has proven to us that he's also a complete mixed martial artist, and he's shown that time and time and time again. And like you said, Rafael Fiziev was able to test the waters in the top 5, and everybody thought, you know, Justin Gaethje's not going to use that wrestling that we know is in his back pocket, but he just simply doesn't use it in mixed martial arts. And if he's going to go out there and try to strike with one of the best strikers the UFC's ever seen in Rafael Fiziev, it could be a long night. Well, we were all way off on that. We all thought Fiziev was going to go out there and put on a masterclass striking performance. It turned out to be the exact opposite. Justin Gaethje went on and put in clinic on Fiziev. So I think this fight is very interesting. I do think BSD is the future of 155. I could definitely see him getting a title shot very soon, but Dustin Poirier is not the guy you want to, you know, basically get called on to fight. He's one of the best fighters at 155. He's one of the guys that's done more heavy lifting for the lightweight division than almost anybody. And I really think that Dustin Poirier has something or sees something in this fight that is really getting him excited, giving him that fire in his stomach, and makes him excited to get up and train for this. Because after his last fight, he was kind of like, you know, I don't really know what I'm going to do. Maybe I'll fight Conor again. Maybe I'll move up to 170. But I've done everything in the sport. I don't really have much else to do. And at this point, I really just need to wait for something to excite me. It was really interesting to see this fight get booked. I was not expecting it at all. I could say probably most people weren't expecting this fight to get made. But if this is the type of fight that Dustin Poirier needed to get himself out of bed every morning, to get angry, to get a chip on his shoulder, then sign me up, because this thing's going to be insane.
Yeah, well, it's very little upside for Dustin and a ton of upside for BSD. Yeah. You know, very rarely does the number 12 in the division get a chance to leapfrog essentially 9 other people and fight the number 3 spot. And at that, the number 3 guy is a guy who's beaten Conor McGregor twice. He's been in there with the biggest names, Khabib, Conor. I mean, the who's who of 155, Dustin has fought, and he's actually beaten a lot of them. Right. So Dustin Poirier is, you know, BSD talked about how he's the new BMF of the UFC, especially of the 155 division. Hard to argue that, but also hard to argue that Dustin isn't a candidate as well. This is par for the course for Dustin Poirier. And when he said something that excites me, I think we all thought monetary, because we know Dustin made a fortune when he fought Conor those 2 times. And when he's like, you know, I need something to really get me going and get me fired up, immediately your mind goes to the money fight, because the last era of MMA, let's be honest, has been quote unquote the money fight, and everybody's chasing it, and very few get the money fight, much less get it twice, which Dustin three times technically, but Conor wasn't red panty Conor when he fought Dustin the first time, but this time around, you know, the last 2 times it certainly was. And Dustin's pocketbook got lined quite substantially with those 2 fights. But what he really meant, and I think what we're seeing now, is that he wants that challenge. He wants that fire. He wants somebody who, if you don't dot every I and cross every T in training camp, he's going to hurt you. And he's not just going to beat you. He's going to brutally knock you out in Benoit Saint Denis. And he has shown that It's over several fights now on a 5-fight win streak. So this is a really interesting fight. I believe that the odds are quite close in this. The odds makers are still giving the veteran Poirier his respect and his due and saying, not so fast. This young guy is a very exciting fighter. He possesses a lot of skills, but he's still in his late 20s. He's on his way up. He's still developing, and he hasn't been tried and tested against the best that the division has to offer. Now, it's going to be really interesting to see how those odds sway. I think early prediction, because this fight is still several months out, I'm leaning towards BSD, but I would not at all be surprised if Dustin Poirier showed us that there's a big gap between number 12 and number 3.
Yeah, I agree. And Dustin Poirier has only been in there with the best of the best in his division for years now. BSD is just now getting his feet wet in the UFC. And while I think he's a great talent, and this is actually just as big of a jump in the rankings as the main event of 299, Sugar Sean O'Malley. Remember when he went down to fight Peter Yan, it was like 11-1, so 12-3 is basically the same thing. And I just feel like this is one of those situations where BSD really needs to study what Sugar Sean was doing and make the most of this opportunity, because if he can get his hand raised against Dustin Poirier, it's off to the races. He'll probably be fighting Islam Makhachev or whoever has the belt, Islam Makhachev, later on in the year or early part of 2025. And if he's not able to get his hand raised, then he at least needs to be able to not devalue himself or not fall off of one loss to one of the best guys the lightweight division's ever seen. And quickly, before we close this out, I want to talk a little bit about the X's and O's, because everybody looks at BSD as one of these guys who's just a monster finisher. He's got heavy hands, great striking all around. His submission game is really, really impressive. But you have to say all the exact same things about Dustin Poirier that you say about BSD. Dustin Poirier can submit you with some really slick stuff. I mean, there's not many people on the planet that can say they've had Khabib Nurmagomedov in a guillotine, and it was pretty tight. And if you ask Khabib personally, he'll say that was one of the tightest things I've ever been put in, not only in a fight, but also in the practice room. Like, Dustin Poirier was squeezing for his life to get that thing done. So Dustin's very dangerous on the ground. I wouldn't say if BSD gets it to the ground, it's going to be a problem. And also, if he tries to stand and trade with Dustin Poirier, you have to realize that he's been working his boxing for years. He's gotten so much better with his boxing. And if you see, what he's doing with Dia Davis is kind of a level above what most MMA fighters are doing when it comes to throwing their hands. He's real crisp. He's real clean. He's better at staying in the pocket, using really good eyes and scoring after you throw and returning and countering than almost anybody in the entire UFC. So this fight to me feels like it's going to be epic. 299 was already shaping up to be a great card, but the addition to this and it being a 5-round fight co-main event, this just makes it even more sweet.
Yeah, 299 is looking real good.